Hello, good morning. Happy Friday. So good to be with you all virtually on this morning. My name is Ola Faleti. I am the Creative Schools Fund Manager, and I am very new to this role this year. I'm coming to Ingenuity from the arts partner side of things. So previously, I was with a creative writing organization called 826 Chicago. So I'm very excited to be working with Eli and also Paul, who will hopefully be joining shortly, and also just getting to know you all as we talk about what's new for the fund this year.
We are really excited to have Ola with us as well. She brings a lot of great experience and background, as well as just an indomitable spirit and the soul of a poet and an artist to the work. And so it has been really fun working with her so far. And I know it'll be a great partnership for Ingenuity going forward. I'm Elizabeth Cole. I go by Eli. And I have been working with the fund since 2015, so have loved getting to know so many of you, and look forward to getting to know those of you that I haven't met yet. Someday, hopefully in person again. But we are really excited to be here to talk about the fund and where it's going. Paul, I wonder, would you like to introduce yourself?
So good morning, everybody. I'm Paul Schneeweiss. I'm Executive Director of Ingenuity. It's nice to see all of you. Thank you for coming and joining us for the All-Part.
Perfect. Okay, Ola, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So I will go ahead and share the slides that we have prepared for today.
Should we ask folks to introduce themselves in the chat? I think we have too many to actually introduce one by one. Yes. We might take up the whole 30 minutes.
And I will, go ahead, Ola. Also add very quickly, if you haven't already, please update your name so that it has your name and your pronouns and also what your organization is. So an overview of what we have for this morning, we will be giving an overview of the Creative Schools Fund, its history, how it's originated, and how it is up until present day. That will come from Paul. Then we'll be discussing some of the new strategies for this year, as we've had to radically reimagine pretty much everything, including the fund. So lots of the thought that went into that, and then the goals that particularly stemmed out of those new strategies, all of which link to the Arts Ed Response Collective and those main 3 points that we're thinking about as we're forging ahead with this year. And then lastly, we will open the floor to you all for any questions and feedback that you may have. So with that being said, I'm going to pass things over to Paul.
Thank you, Ola, and welcome everyone. I'm glad you have a chance to meet Ola Faleti, our newest addition to the Creative Schools Fund Management team. We're so pleased to have her here, along with Eli, to lead our efforts with the Creative Schools Fund. So the Creative Schools Fund has been around since 2013. Hard to believe time has traveled so quickly. And the original purpose of the fund was to really accelerate sector-wide a shared vision, which is to ensure that arts education access for every student in CPS and every grade. And the Creative Schools Fund was launched originally with some privately raised dollars. We did what was called the Creative Schools Campaign. And we raised about $16 million way back in the day. And it was designed as a spend down, which is to say it's not an endowed fund like any normal prototypical foundation you might typically apply from. And so in order to keep the Creative Schools Fund alive, we have been continuing to raise money because those funds have been expended. We're continuing to raise money as we go. So starting in 2016, the Creative Schools Fund transitioned to a really true public-private funding partnership where CPS, Chicago Public Schools, began chipping in almost half of the annual dollars that we distribute in the form of grants. Shortly thereafter, the mayor's office began to also contribute, and today the Creative Schools Fund is a 3-way funding partnership, which cumulatively has invested about $14 million in Chicago Public Schools to support teacher design programs in classrooms. Historically, the fund has had a simple goal, which is to fill gaps in arts education access and lift up innovative models that could be replicated within the district. So often teachers, schools, principals do astonishingly wonderful things within the context of confined resources, and really do a wonderful job of getting innovative with how to bring the arts to their students. And so the idea is to lift those up, elevate those, recognize those, and fuel growth and progress in schools. It has relied heavily on, deeply in partnerships with arts organizations, over 80% of our grants in any given year. As with any strategy, we have to evolve over time, right? And like adding a sustainability goal to support schools to improve their creative school certification levels, or by increasing arts education access more permanently in schools. These were usually based on the feedback of teachers and principals, arts organizations, what we saw working and not working in the grants each year, and importantly, what the creative school certification data told us about the greatest needs and assets in the district each year. But the change this year that we've made to the Creative Schools Fund is more wholesale. This year, we have seen, obviously, this year, the changes we have seen to instruction, the role of the arts within the school day, and the way partnerships can and are happening in schools or not, and in turn have really asked us to change by the same measure of degrees in the Creative Schools Fund. We heard Nicole speak earlier this morning about radical flexibility, and Ingenuity needs to apply that to our own work as well. Especially, they've required us to walk the walk of all the themes in the Arts Ed Response Collective recommendations, to embrace that radical flexibility, to prioritize professional learning, to advance racial justice in our equity work in ever more central ways. And so to share a little bit more about that, I'm going to pass the mic to Eli, who's going to share more about the process that led to those changes and what those changes look like and what they mean for you today.
Thank you, Paul. So I'll talk a little bit about the strategies that we have devised this year and how we came to them. But first, I'll just share some basics for those of you who may not be as familiar with the fund. So the Creative Schools Fund is composed of many types of funding. Each year, the kind of main source of funding, or the biggest one, is run through a competitive grant cycle in which Ingenuity accepts applications from schools and then allocates $10,000 grants, usually around $10,000, to between 100 and 150 schools each year. And usually about 80% of those are residencies of some type with an arts organization. So they're largely driven by partnerships. They've also supported things like professional development, curriculum and skill building, and experiential learning, field trips, etc. And so art supplies, materials, capital improvements in the schools, any number of things. And so the role of the fund, as Paul has described, has been as this kind of accelerator, trying to advance this sector-wide vision. And knowing that $10,000 is kind of a drop in the bucket when you think of a school budget, it's also, you know, even millions of dollars is a drop in the bucket when you think of a district-wide budget in the billions. We've always sort of thought of the fund as something that kind of pushes at the edges, incentivizes the kind of progress that we hope to see in arts education, and helps kind of close the gap, but isn't necessarily going to kind of move the lever, move the needle for a school wholesale. And so knowing that partnerships have been central and wanting to kind of hold true to that, and that's kind of one of the biggest impacts that we've seen over time. Also knowing that one of the biggest impacts that we've seen as a result of the fund has been the sort of capacity building for teachers who manage the grants. They are able to benefit from a community of practice. Often teachers who are the only arts teacher in a school, who work with an arts organization and suddenly have a teaching artist who they can bounce ideas off of and program with and plan with, end up having this kind of community that they hadn't had before, which ends up feeding their own teaching practice in a very kind of long-lasting way. And so knowing that those two things are really important outcomes of the fund, we wanted to make sure that those were front of mind as we were designing strategies for this year, so partnerships and adult learning. And so as we were planning for this year, we really listened through the Arts Ed Response Collective, through teacher focus groups and student focus groups, thinking about district-wide priorities, and then of course, listening to communities engaged in protest and mobilization. And what we understood, or what we kind of saw, is that we are in a strong place as a district. We have one of the largest Department of Arts Ed departments that we've had in recent memory, near full participation in the Creative Schools Certification Survey among schools. And so very strong arts awareness, incredible arts growth over the last 8 years. At the same time, like everyone, we are seeing unprecedented, right, the word of the year, unprecedented changes in the schools. So changes in the instructional model that can be unpredictable. Shifts in art practices due to COVID-19 and mitigating the effects of that. New structures for partnerships within remote learning. And overall, just a demand for adaptability and flexibility as we go forward. And so what we heard specifically among the people that we consulted with through the ARC process is a focus within the arts education community on the need for healing through the arts, investing in trauma-informed practice, as well as highlighting the benefit of progressive, sustained relationships and partnerships, and how that can sort of bolster a school community and a partnership over time, even through a crisis like the closures in the spring. From arts educators, we heard concerns about adapting arts education to safety protocols and remote learning and what that might look like and what it might cost. From students, we heard the need for deeper arts engagement and a desire for avenues to high quality artistic practice, even in the remote environment. The district focus was on relationship building, coming back to the school community, as well as the need for art supplies and materials that we knew would be dominant in the fall. And then finally, the community-wide mobilization, protesting racial inequities that were exacerbated by COVID-19 and sparked by police murders that continue to this day and have engaged the arts community, engaged students, and are very much front of mind as we went into planning. We can go to the next slide. And so we are very excited to announce the 3 goals for the fund this year, which are direct response to everything that we have heard over the last 6 months. And so the 3 goals you see here, and I'll walk through them in a little bit of detail. Community building through the arts, and this is thinking about this time when people are separated, sometimes by 6 feet, other times by more. It can be a very isolating time. And so this fund area is about bringing people back together. And that can look a lot of different ways, whether it's virtual or in-person learning, if that resumes, then at a COVID-safe physical distance. But it's thinking about across any model of instruction, how are you bringing the school community together? Whether that's through performances, art making, exhibitions, kind of a conceptual art piece that ties the school community together, et cetera. And so these areas are a little bit different. So the connectivity through the arts area is really about just bringing people together. Reuniting through the arts is thinking about social emotional learning, trauma-informed practice, and really responding to some of the difficulties that student and adult populations have been through over the last 6 months. And I'll say that it's important to note that for this area, as well as many others, we're interested in programs that work not just with students, but with the adults in the building. So thinking about uniting teachers, bringing administration and teachers together, thinking about the social emotional capabilities of adult teaching teams are just as valid for this area as student instruction, et cetera. The next area is deepening arts quality. And this was in direct response from student focus groups who shared that during the spring remote learning period, they really missed opportunities for quality arts practice. They didn't have a quiet practice room. They needed their instrument. They wanted a dance floor. They didn't have the supplies for their visual arts work. Or simply the people that they typically did their arts work with. They just didn't have that chance to really scaffold their learning in the same way across the remote environment. And so, we developed this area thinking about students in particular, but we really mean it for the whole school. And we're focused here on two things: artistic supplies, knowing that in a virtual environment, supplies are something that we may need to send home, literally, to students so that they can continue their arts learning, or should in-person learning resume, that art materials and supplies can no longer be shared, and so schools will typically need many more of them in order to be able to program. And then artistic practice, supporting high quality artistic practice. And again, here we're talking about adults as well as students. And so if an art teacher wants to develop their own artistic practice and nurture their sort of identity as an artist as well as a teacher, this is something that would be interesting for this area as well. It could also be more traditional professional development, etc. And then finally, the third area is justice through the arts. And this is really thinking about the extraordinary mobilization across the youth and arts communities in response to the police murders in the spring and summer, the protest and action happening nationwide and ongoing to this day. And so we really here are supporting student-driven projects that use art as a medium to advance anti-racism and racial justice. I will say that this strategy centers student voice and student-driven programming, thinking about capturing the lived experiences of students, and then also thinking about arts civics integration. This area draws heavily from the principles and focus of the social science and civic engagement team at CPS, which has many tools and resources in particular about talking about racial justice and thinking critically about civic engagement. And so there's a lot of potential here for integrated arts units with social science units, as well as for standalone work, thinking about arts as a tool for social change and student-driven work in that regard. So we also want to just share some changes in process, which, as Paul said earlier, are wholesale. In previous years, the Creative Schools Fund competitive grant cycle had an October due date with notification in December, and then funds were loaded for schools to use in the spring semester, which is, for those of you who've participated in this before, sometimes would kind of crunch your programming timeline a little bit, especially if funds were delayed in any way. And we often, at this very meeting each year, would get a lot of questions asking if we could change the cycle to program for the whole year, to provide funds in the fall, to make the grants available in a different way. And this year we are able to do that. And so the competitive grants will actually be offered on a rolling application cycle. Schools can submit grants anytime between now and February. And then they'll be notified of their grant award within 6 to 8 weeks of that submission. And then funds will be loaded shortly thereafter so that they can program with the maximum amount of time available for programming their projects. We wanted to do this, first of all, because we wanted to get arts resources into schools faster this fall. And so, we didn't want to have to wait until February or so to actually get funds into the hands of schools and programs. But we also knew that that should the instructional model change, should policies or partnerships change over the course of the year, that we needed to give enough time that partners and programs and schools could actually be as flexible as they needed to for any interruptions that might occur. And so knowing we're going to ask applicants to tell us how they plan to be flexible and how they have kind of a plan A and plan B. And in turn, we needed to open up more time to make that possible. So that's why we've made this change. And then of course, monitoring will be virtual this year, as well as everything else. So finally, I just want to kind of complete the loop and tie this back to the themes that Nicole spoke about this morning. And I'll say that radical flexibility, first of all, the leading action one, is something that we really took to heart with the overhaul of our process. And that was not comfortable, I would say, for us. It took some wrangling to figure out. The Ingenuity board had to kind of pre-approve grant funds without a list of schools and an understanding of how it's meeting all kinds of goals and criteria. So it was a bit of a leap of faith, but they knew and we knew that we had to do whatever we could to get funds into the hands of schools and programs as quickly as possible so that we could power as much flexibility as possible for a changing landscape. And I'll say that CPS and the mayor's office, who match all of those funds to make up a robust funding stream, are also taking this radical flexibility to heart and thinking about how we can really all work together to power these programs to the best degree possible. But we also applied radical flexibility to the strategies. So our previous strategies, I think, might have kind of implicitly encouraged a classic residency model. But our new goals outline thematically what we have heard from schools and students in terms of what they need. But we knew that we were building them with the idea that programs wouldn't look the same as they always have. And that if we were going to prioritize partnerships, for example, we needed to be as flexible as possible in how a partnership program is defined. And so working with adults in a school, building a professional development program, supporting teachers in their virtual learning efforts, even if a partner is not able to directly program with students, felt really important. And so being able to form meaningful partnerships and meaningful relationships, regardless of what that looks like or what constraints there might be, is something that we wanted to really enable with the strategies. Action 2, around knowledge sharing and professional learning, I think is clear. I've spoken about how the adults in the school are important too, and inviting professional development, establishing communities of practice, building social emotional capabilities of adults are things that we would love to see in this area. And then action 3. So thinking about advancing racial justice and racial equity through the Creative Schools Fund explicitly through our third area is something that we really wanted to align with ARC around. And in this area, I think centering student voice is very much something that came out of the ARC process, out of student focus groups, and is built into the very structure of the application itself for this area. I'll say the fund on the whole as well also prioritizes schools that currently lack access to arts education for students at the levels hoped for by CPS. And this actually aligns with some of the racial inequities that we see. So those schools that are still struggling in the arts are also serving higher populations of students of color compared to those that are strong or excelling in the arts. So I will turn to Ola to share a little bit about the specifics and logistics for this year. And I'll say that if you have specific questions, we don't have a ton of time, so if you want to put them in chat, I will simultaneously be responding to questions in the chat while Ola is talking about eligibility.
Awesome. Thank you, Eli. The Creative Schools Fund supports schools that have already made initial investments in supporting the arts, and that's the reasoning behind what our eligibility requirements are. So for schools that are submitting a CSF application, they must have completed the 2019-2020 Creative School Certification Survey. At this point, you've heard reference to this multiple times. It is closing today, so school partners must have completed that survey. They must also have a principal nominated arts liaison who is the one actually filling out and ultimately submitting the application. Of course, this is a very collaborative process, but the arts liaison in many ways is the main point person, I should say, for this process. Schools must also have at least one certified or endorsed arts instructor who is part-time or full-time. And then in addition, schools must adhere to CPS policies around working with arts organizations and also making sure that there is a certified arts instructor or endorsed arts instructor in the classroom if students are being directly worked with. Additionally, all arts partners have to have an up-to-date partner profile on the Artlook map. For eligible activities, the more fun stuff, arts partnerships continue to be something that we want to promote and uphold, as those have typically been a large portion of applicants in past years, partnering with other arts orgs. Any programming that is happening with students must take place during school time and during school hours. Programming can also mean programming in this sense can also mean knowledge sharing. So if an arts partner provided a teacher with the tools to implement a program and the teacher was the one actually facilitating it, that would be eligible as far as programming with arts partnerships. We also support professional learning for teachers out of school time. That's very eligible around skill building as well, and building communities of practice. We can also support work with a consultant, and that can be around curriculum development. So adapting older curriculum or creating new one in this remote context that we're currently in. That can be around ways to integrate the arts more deeply into the schools. And that can also be also just supporting arts materials, supplies, technology, etc. Things that are ineligible, we will not support any projects that will replace arts instruction provided by an art teacher. We aren't supporting after school or out of school time programming, as we mentioned earlier, and we also are not supporting CPS teacher salaries. Okay, so that brings us to the end. I know Eli's asking questions. I will stop sharing my screen and I will just point out the contacts that are here if you have any questions. I think we have another minute or so left.
Yes, we actually at 11:20 are finishing this session. There will be a 5-minute break, and then we will reconvene in the large session for hot topics, as they're called, which is kind of a overall Q&A. And so we invite you to take a break, you know, visit with family or whatever e-learning might be going on in the background of your house, and then come back over there. And I think Ola will put the link to the main Zoom in the chat, right?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. There it is. I don't see questions. Okay, there are some questions coming through. So I will invite all of you to go ahead and take a break if you want. For those of you who are asking questions, Ola and I can hang out for a couple more minutes and answer questions. Yes, there's a question about within CSF, do you have to pick one of the A or B categories? And you do. So for example, if you were doing the racial justice category, you would want to choose either lived experiences or the arts civics integration, but you couldn't choose both. And the application kind of forces you to choose as you go through. Of course, we can provide the emails for Ola and me. I'll put those in the chat right now. That's Ola. Oops, I sent that the wrong place, sorry. And Ryan, I'm not sure I understand your question. I'm sorry. I don't think we have supported animation before, no. But certainly that's an if you wanted to partner with a school on something like that, that's definitely an application that we would be happy to look at.
Perfect, thank you.
And if you wanted to talk about that offline, just write write the CSF email and we can have a conversation about that. That sounds interesting.
Thank you.
Existing relationships with school partners, it's really up to you. We don't sort of prioritize one way or another. So whether it's a new school relationship or a continuing one is equally encouraged. Any other questions? Okay. It sounds like that might be it for now.
Okay.
Oh, main meeting link. There it is. Thank you, Ola. Okay, let's go back to the main room and we will look forward to seeing you there. Take care, everyone.